Lily Henson was the sheriff's daughter, the girl everyone in Ridgewood adored, the symbol of innocence in a quiet town. But the night she vanished from her locked bedroom, the truth buried beneath her family's perfect image began to crawl to the surface. When she returned a week later, barefoot, silent, and staring into nothing, the townspeople thought she had survived a nightmare. What they didn't know was that the real horror had only just begun, because the person she feared most wasn't a stranger in the dark. It was her own father. The town of Ridgewood rested quietly between rolling hills and endless rows of pine trees. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where people left their doors unlocked and waved at passing cars. Sheriff Dale Henson was the symbol of that peace, a man everyone trusted, admired, and believed would keep them safe no matter what. His house, a modest white two-story home at the edge of town, looked like every family's dream. His daughter, Lily Henson, was 17, bright, and full of life. She loved taking pictures of sunsets from her bedroom window, often telling her mother that Ridgewood was too perfect to ever feel unsafe. But one summer night proved her wrong. It started as an ordinary evening. The air was warm, and the sky carried the faint orange glow of a fading sunset. The sheriff and his wife, Martha, had dinner with Lily and their younger son, Ben. They laughed, talked about college applications, and then turned in early. Nothing seemed out of place. Around midnight, a soft wind blew through the town, rustling the trees outside the Henson home. The sound was faint, almost soothing, but by morning, Ridgewood would wake to a nightmare that would never be forgotten. When Martha entered Lily's room the next morning, she found it perfectly neat, the way Lily always kept it. Her phone sat on the dresser, plugged in and still charging. The curtains swayed from an open window, and the faint scent of lilies drifted in from the garden below. But Lily was gone. Her bed hadn't been slept in. The pillow was untouched, the blanket smooth, and a single hair tie lay on the floor near the window. Panic hit Martha before logic could. She ran to her husband, her voice breaking, and soon the sheriff was calling every available officer. By noon, Ridgewood turned into a search zone. Volunteers walked through fields, drones scanned wooded areas, and news vans parked outside the sheriff's house. The missing girl was the sheriff's daughter, a headline that drew attention from every corner of the state. But despite the massive search, there were no clues. No footprints near the window, no signs of forced entry, and no messages on her phone. The last thing she had done was open a text around 10:37 p.m. The sender was listed as unknown. The message read only 3 words: "Look outside now." Days turned into a week, and hope began to fade. The sheriff, once the face of calm authority, now looked like a ghost. His voice cracked during press briefings, and his eyes carried sleepless nights. Then, on the 7th morning, something unbelievable happened. At dawn, a gas station clerk saw a barefoot girl walking along Main Street. Her white nightgown was torn, her skin pale and scratched, and her eyes empty like she had seen death itself. It was Lily. She didn't speak a word. She didn't cry. She only looked straight ahead, as if she had walked out of a nightmare she could never escape. Ridgewood's peace had been broken, and Sheriff Henson's life would never be the same again. The return of Lily Henson should have been a miracle, but it quickly turned into something far darker. The girl who stepped back into the Henson home wasn't the same one who had disappeared a week before. Lily no longer smiled, no longer spoke, and no longer seemed aware of the world around her. She spent hours staring out her window, eyes fixed on the woods behind the house, her fingers trembling as if she were cold even when wrapped in blankets. When Martha tried to hug her, Lily stood motionless, unresponsive, like a statue carved from fear itself. Doctors found no physical injuries beyond a few bruises and shallow cuts. They said her condition was psychological, a severe trauma response. The sheriff and his wife hoped that time and therapy would bring her back, but every night, something strange happened. As soon as darkness fell, Lily refused to sleep. She would pace around her room, murmuring things no one could understand. Sometimes she scratched symbols into the wooden floor with her fingernails. Other times, she pressed her ear to the wall, listening as though she could hear someone whispering on the other side. The sheriff tried to ignore the growing sense of dread in his own home, but the town wouldn't let him. Word of Lily's condition spread quickly. People said she had seen something unholy in the woods. Some claimed she'd been taken by someone who wasn't human. Others whispered that maybe she hadn't been taken at all, that maybe she had run from something inside her own house. Ridgewood had always been a quiet, trusting community, but now its peace began to crack. Neighbors who once greeted each other with smiles now spoke in low tones, eyes filled with suspicion. Sheriff Henson threw himself into the investigation, desperate to find whoever had done this to his daughter. He requested surveillance footage from gas stations, traffic cameras, and nearby farms. He interviewed dozens of residents, searching for anyone who might have seen a vehicle that night. But every lead went nowhere. Then, one morning, an envelope appeared on his desk. No name, no return address. Inside were 3 Polaroid photographs. The first showed a dimly lit room with a figure tied to a chair. The second revealed the girl's face. It was Lily, terrified, her eyes reflecting the camera's flash. The third was the most haunting. Behind Lily, in the shadows, something metallic gleamed under the light. It wasn't until Sheriff Henson looked closer that he realized what it was: a badge. His badge. His hands shook as he examined the photos again, his heart racing with disbelief. He checked the badge number. It matched his own. For the first time in his career, the sheriff felt real fear, not for his daughter, but for what the pictures seemed to suggest. Someone inside his department had been involved. Someone who knew him, who worked beside him, and who had turned his family's tragedy into a silent threat. Ridgewood's lawman now stood on the edge of a horrifying truth, one that could destroy everything he had built. The discovery of the Polaroids sent shockwaves through the department. Sheriff Henson handed them over to the state investigators, though his hands trembled as he did so. For the first time in his career, he wasn't the man in control. The FBI was called in, and the local police force was quietly placed under review. Officers who had once saluted him now avoided eye contact. His own deputies were questioned one by one, their service weapons inspected, their patrol routes examined. The town that had always trusted its sheriff now whispered about him behind closed doors. Lily remained locked away in her silence. She didn't leave her room, barely ate, and refused to meet anyone's eyes. The therapist said her drawings were the only clue to her fractured memory. On her sketch pad, she drew the same scene over and over again, a small wooden cabin surrounded by trees. In every drawing, there was a shadow in the window, long and thin, watching her. Each time the sheriff saw those drawings, something deep inside him twisted. He recognized the cabin. He had been there years ago during a manhunt, but that cabin had been abandoned since before Lily was born. Investigators followed that clue. Deep in the woods, miles from town, they found it. The cabin stood exactly as Lily had drawn it, small, decaying, its windows covered in grime. Inside, the air was thick with mold and dust. But under a broken light bulb, they found the same wooden chair from the photographs. Torn ropes lay scattered on the floor. Nearby, a faded blanket embroidered with Lily's initials rested in a corner. A box of camera film sat on a table, its top half melted by heat. There were footprints too, 2 sets. One small, barefoot, and another larger, made by heavy boots. The agents collected everything, taking photographs, fingerprints, and samples. When the sheriff entered the scene later, he felt the air leave his lungs. He recognized one more thing, a cigarette but lying near the doorway. It was the brand used by only one man in his department, Deputy Rick Coleman, his closest friend and Lily's godfather. When confronted, Rick was calm. He said he hadn't been near that cabin in years and suggested someone was trying to frame him. But forensic evidence disagreed. Fingerprints from the camera lenses matched his. And when detectives searched his house, they uncovered something even more disturbing. Behind a false wall in his basement, they found rows of VHS tapes and photographs labeled with dates. Every label carried Lily's name. The footage showed ordinary moments, Lily walking to school, sitting in her backyard, studying in her room. Someone had been watching her for months. The tapes ended exactly a week before she disappeared. The town was horrified. Rick Coleman was arrested. His image splashed across every news channel. Yet even as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked directly at the sheriff and said only one thing. "You know this isn't me." That night, Sheriff Henson sat alone in his daughter's darkened room, surrounded by her drawings. Lily stirred in her sleep, whispering something soft and broken. The sheriff leaned closer and heard her mumble a single phrase again and again, almost like a prayer. It wasn't Rick's name she was afraid of. It was something else, something that made his blood run cold. She kept repeating one word in her sleep. Home. Deputy Rick Coleman's arrest divided Ridgewood. Half the town believed justice had been served. The other half whispered that something didn't add up. Sheriff Henson tried to convince himself that his longtime friend was guilty, but a small voice inside him wouldn't stop asking questions. Rick had worked beside him for over 15 years, knew his routines, his family, even helped build the swing set in Lily's backyard. The idea that he had been secretly watching her felt impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The tapes, the fingerprints, the hidden wall, all pointed in one direction. Still, something about the case felt too clean, too carefully arranged. Lily's condition worsened after Rick's arrest. She began to wake in the middle of the night screaming, clutching her chest as if she couldn't breathe. Her drawings changed too. The cabin was gone, replaced by something else. Dark hallways, a metal door, and a figure in a uniform standing over her. Martha tried to comfort her, but Lily wouldn't let her touch her. The sheriff watched helplessly as his daughter's fear grew stronger each day. Every time he looked into her hollow eyes, he felt the weight of guilt pressing down harder, even though he couldn't explain why. One evening, Martha found something strange while cleaning the laundry room. Beneath a loose floorboard, she discovered a folded piece of paper, old, wrinkled, and stained. On it were 3 words written in shaky handwriting: "He wears stars." The message made her blood run cold. She brought it to her husband, her hands trembling. Sheriff Henson stared at the note for a long time. The meaning was clear enough. In Ridgewood, only one kind of man wore stars: law enforcement. Someone in uniform had been inside their home. The next morning, he visited Rick in jail. The man's eyes were hollow, his voice low and steady. He claimed he had been framed and begged Dale to look closer at the evidence. He swore he had no reason to hurt Lily, that someone wanted him out of the way. When Dale asked who, Rick said nothing, only smiled weakly and whispered that the truth was already inside his house. That night, Dale couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified: the ticking of the clock, the groan of the floorboards, the soft hum of Lily's nightlight. He poured himself a drink and stared at his badge on the table, the reflection of the metal glinting under the lamp. Something about it reminded him of the Polaroid. The shine, the angle, it looked exactly the same. At 3 a.m, Lily screamed again. The sheriff ran to her room and found her sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open, pointing toward the corner. Her voice, weak and broken, cracked through the silence. For the first time since her return, she spoke clearly. She looked at him and whispered one word: "Dad." Then she buried her face in her hands and refused to say another thing. The room fell silent except for her sobs. The sheriff felt his entire world tilt. In that moment, the truth he had tried to bury began clawing its way to the surface. He suddenly realized the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun, and this time, it lived within his own walls. Sheriff Dale Henson's world collapsed the moment his daughter spoke that single word: "Dad." It echoed in his mind long after she fell silent, refusing to meet his eyes. He told himself she was confused, that her trauma was making her see things that weren't real. But deep down, he already knew the truth. The image of his own badge in those Polaroids, the way the crime scene had felt too familiar, the missing hours he couldn't account for during the week Lily vanished. It all began to form a picture he couldn't escape. He had tried to suppress it, to convince himself that Rick Coleman was the monster, but his conscience refused to stay quiet any longer. Investigators continued to dig deeper, re-examining every piece of evidence. One of the agents noticed something odd in the storage rental database. A small, climate-controlled unit had been rented just outside Ridgewood under the name Daniel Heston. The handwriting on the contract was shaky but recognizable. It was Sheriff Henson's, only slightly altered. The FBI obtained a warrant and broke the lock. Inside the unit, the air was cold, metallic, and suffocating. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a dim glow over what remained inside. In the center stood the same wooden chair seen in the Polaroids. Around it, ropes, tape, and a camera sat neatly on a table. A small piece of cloth embroidered with Lily's initials lay folded in the corner. The horror was undeniable. When they checked the camera, they found one video file still stored on the memory card. The footage showed the sheriff himself, standing before the chair, adjusting the ropes, muttering under his breath. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. He wasn't wearing his uniform, but a dark hoodie and gloves. For a few seconds, he looked directly into the camera before turning off the light. It was enough to end every doubt. The man Ridgewood trusted most had been the one behind his own daughter's abduction. The truth, when finally uncovered, was even more twisted. Sheriff Henson had discovered Rick Coleman's secret months before. The hidden tapes, the stalking, the obsession. Instead of reporting him, Henson decided to punish him himself. He planned to fake Lily's kidnapping, make it look like Rick had done it, and ruin the man's life. But the plan spiraled out of control. Lily woke during the stage scene, saw her father's face behind the mask, and screamed. In a panic, Henson drugged her, leaving her tied up in the cabin before guilt forced him to bring her home days later. What he didn't expect was that Lily would remember, not through words, but through fear, silence, and sleepless nights. The arrest of Sheriff Henson shattered Ridgewood beyond repair. Reporters flooded the town, neighbors moved away, and the once proud police department was dismantled. Henson was found guilty of kidnapping, evidence tampering, and child endangerment. He never spoke during the trial. Lily, still silent, sat in the courtroom only once, her eyes empty as her father was led away in chains. Years later, the Henson house still stood at the edge of town, its windows boarded, the yard overgrown. People said they sometimes saw a light flicker in Lily's old room, as if someone were still awake inside. No one stayed near after dark. The sheriff's daughter had returned, but peace never did, and Ridgewood learned that evil doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes it wears a badge,